Jesus' legend was borrowed by ancient myths and other religions. This objection is given in a variety of forms, and I have taken the time to gather and benefit from the research of much larger minds than my own. And to give full credit where it is due, I'd like to point you to where this information has been gathered from. Due to the hard work of Michael Jones, who is also known online as Inspiring Philosophy, while the information that he provides on some biblical sources is certainly worth checking into more than a surface degree, his resources on apologetics, polemics, and especially in addressing these sort of claims are phenomenal, and I recommend that you check each and every one of them out in turn. They are generally titled Jesus versus so-and-so, Krishna, Romulus, Dionysus, Attis, Ishtar. All of the others that he is going to address in his videos are what provide the citation for what we're reading today, and I'll be happy to provide the links to them in the comments if you so request. But to address this question in the context of this video and giving full credit where it is due, Michael Jones did the majority of the reading. I double checked his work and it does check out. But when it comes to this claim, the reality is that the facts are on our side. Apart from the fact that gods in pagan myths also performed miracles, which is incredibly vague, the overwhelming majority of claims that ancient pagan myths are identical to the Gospels are simply false. If you actually read the myths or know anything about the religions and their accounts of their gods, every single time that they make a direct comparison to Jesus beyond the most superficial comparisons, they are either fabricated or misrepresenting their sources. Every single source that bears a closer resemblance to Christianity, and note there are some, unfortunately for the skeptic, is dated after Christianity, oftentimes by centuries. And this was known throughout the Roman Empire as well, that Christianity was well established before these myths and these writings had been circulated. So if we're going to make the claim that someone copied from someone, it's generally from the person who came first. Also note that the evidence of this copying is credited to the pagans in some very dramatic and direct ways. The only people that would claim the opposite are those with an agenda. So to claim then that Jesus was a legend like pagan myths in the past is not only a horrible comparison to make, but considering the fact that the gospel accounts are cited from the original eyewitnesses of these events, compared to the pagan texts who are classified as mythology by these historians for the very reason they provide no archaeology, no eyewitness sources, and no citation to verify whether or not these events took place apart from themselves. The Gospels are some of the most well-attested accounts of ancient history. Mythology is referred to as such, be it Norse, Greek, Roman, or any other form, Egyptian, of these sort, simply because of the fact that there is no evidence apart from the claims made on their own in and of themselves. So going into a few examples, I obviously don't want to go into every claim and video that Michael Jones has taken the incredible time to make, but given the high quality of his videos and the citation that he will provide, I'll simply read through some of the claims that are made by atheists so that you listening to this video are equipped with the bare bones information, the actual facts on the table, and you can confirm and verify them through further research by checking out these individual videos that, again, Inspiring Philosophy has produced. Starting with the most common, the claim that Jesus was based on the myth of Horus is factually false. They would claim that he was baptized at the age of 30 by Anup the Baptizer in Zeitgeist. Unfortunately, this isn't anywhere in the Egyptian sources. The same is for an individual named El Azarus being raised from the dead by Horus. That is nowhere in any written source on Horus. This was just basically made up. He was visited by 3 wise men. Again, that is false. Horus wasn't visited by 3 wise men, and neither was Jesus. He was visited by an undisclosed number of magi from the Parthian Empire with 3 gifts. And Daniel's prophecies clued them in as to the significance of this star in the east that signaled them to make that long journey into enemy territory. They were guided by a moving light, an aster, not a star. The translations sometimes are unfortunate, and the liberties that the Roman Catholic Church has taken to form traditions around these three wise men are unfortunately non-historical. So if we're going to make any claim about Horus and Jesus, they would have to be true for even one or the other, but unfortunately they're not. Horus is supposedly born of a virgin. Unfortunately, this is a little graphic, so fair warning. Isis, his mother, wasn't a virgin. She turned into a bird and had sex with the corpse of Osiris. Now, a combination of necrophilia and bestiality may be a lot of things, but a virgin conception is not one of them. He was born on December 25th. Once again, neither the Egyptian Book of the Dead or the Bible claim that for Jesus or Horus. He had 12 disciples. That is false. The only evidence they have to support this is a hieroglyph where Horus is surrounded by the 12 signs of the zodiac. These weren't necessarily followers. These were just symbols associated with him. Jesus also did not have 12 followers. He had 12 apostles and hundreds of disciples. So make sure that our facts are straight there. Again, the claim that Horus and Jesus both performed miracles. All pagan gods did that. If you're going to claim that's a ripoff, that would be like claiming Marvel rips off DC because they both involve superheroes. It's not reasonable. And then finally, Horus was crucified, buried in a tomb, and rose from the dead. Horus died by being torn into pieces and scattered throughout the Nile River. His mom put him back together again and brought him to the underworld where he didn't return. Crucifixion wasn't invented until around 500 BC by the Assyrians, which is over 1,000 years after Horus's myth was completed. So these claims are all verifiably false, or in the case of miracles, too vague to actually be noted as a copy or comparison. Moving on from Egyptian paganism into Hinduism, the claim that Jesus is based on the myth of Krishna is factually false. Krishna is claimed to have taught through parables, and Jesus also taught through parables. The problem is that Krishna didn't teach through parables. He taught things about Hinduism. But to say that, oh, well, they're both teachers, so clearly Krishna and Jesus are the same person. Well, first of all, you're wrong in the claim that they taught through these illustrative comparisons, and they also didn't even teach the same religion. So that's 2 strikes against your credibility. His beloved disciple, Arunja, means John. You can ask anyone who speaks the language native to India. It doesn't. Was killed at 30 and rose from the dead. According to the Hindu sources, the Bhagavad Gita, he was killed at 125, not 30, with an arrow, not through crucifixion, by a hunter named Jara, not by the Romans, and this was done by accident, not an intentional response to political manipulation by the Jewish leaders. He also returned to the place of the Hindu gods. He didn't rise from the dead. He was crucified on a tree between 2 thieves, the claim is made about Krishna. The problem is, once again, crucifixion was not invented during Krishna's quote-unquote lifetime. He was killed by an arrow by accident. He is called the Lion of the tribe of Saki. Again, that is factually false. No Hindu source would ever say such a thing. He was born of a virgin. His mother Devaki had 7 other sons before he was born, and they were conceived naturally. He was born without the need for intercourse, but she wasn't a virgin. You can note a miraculous birth as a comparison, but once again, our earliest copies of these Hindu sources date centuries after the establishment of Christianity, in which we have tradition, note, not authoritative, but nonetheless mentions of Thomas having traveled to India to share the gospel before he was martyred before the end of the 1st century. This would be a long time before these things were written in writing. And he was also noted, Krishna, as the 2nd person of the Hindu Trimurti, so a comparison to the Trinity is here. The problem is that is false. Krishna was one of the 10 avatars of Vishnu who came in various forms, limiting to but not including a fish, a bear, an ox, a man, and so forth. Krishna was a separate god from Shiva and Brahma, who they consider as a part of this triad of deities, but just because there's three chief deities and hundreds of thousands of other deities below them does not mean that it is any way comparable to a trinity, meaning there is one and only one God with three separate and unique centers of consciousness. So, with all of that hopefully clarified, the Krishna claim is factually false. In Eastern religions, a little bit closer to and in association with Christianity, and admittingly, note this, in existence before the time of Jesus, the claim that Jesus is based on the myth of Zoroaster is factually false. They claim that Zoroaster was born of a virgin. Unfortunately, according to these sources, Zoroaster's mother was married and had children before he was born, i.e., not a virgin. He was baptized in a river. Once again, Zoroaster received his revelations about Ahriman and Ahura Mazda by a river, but he wasn't dedicated to God in a Jewish ceremony of purification. It wasn't baptism. It was just a location. To say that they were both next to a river when their ministry began is very vague. He was tempted in the wilderness by the devil for 40 days. Zoroaster was attacked by Buiti for 10 years, not 40 days. And Buiti wasn't the head demon, Ahriman. He was a lesser spirit. And also note, he faced these trials and attacks within temples, not in the wilderness. He cast out demons and healed a blind man. There's no mention of Zoroaster having any power over demons, and the only mention of him performing a miracle like Jesus did is in the Shahrastani of Khorasan, and this is dated to 1,000 years after Jesus' Gospels were made available to the known world. It is also worth noting that this is one of the earliest sources we have on Zoroastrianism, short of their own sacred text, by the which all the way were lost before the Muslim persecution that broke out in the 7th and 8th century, when they fled into the eastern parts of India and Asia as a whole. They didn't take or preserve a lot of their writings, so whatever came back had obviously intermingled with some things, and we can't test anything beyond the claims of temples that have some semblance of Zoroastrianism in them. He was referred to, Zoroastrianism, or Zoroaster rather, as the Word made flesh and taught communion through a cup and a Eucharist. Give one example. That is factually false. And Zoroaster taught about heaven, hell, judgment, and salvation. Once again, every religion addresses those things. That is very generic, and the meanings of those terms are the opposite of Jesus's. In Jesus' account, God alone would judge, not a committee, as opposed to Zoroastrianism. Salvation in Zoroastrianism is through works, in following Persian virtue, not ultimately because of the grace and mercy of God. And also note that heaven and hell, according to some sects of Zoroastrianism, alternate in power over this world every 4,000 years. Other groups claim that Ahura Mazda will eventually overpower Ahriman, but they are equal in power in a dyad, or a dualism, a two-deity system right now. Ahriman was the one who created this universe with bodily fluids, I won't tell you which ones, and from that statement, he was the one who dominated the early creation. When Ahura Mazda, or Mazd, as he was called at the time, grew in power, he started lifting up the Persian people as his chosen. So with that said, we don't see a lot of examples or comparisons to Jesus if you actually read the sources. Fourth, the claim that Jesus is based on the myth of Mithra is factually false. They claim Mithra was born of a virgin. If you mean a rock, yes, the rock was not a woman that had had sexual intercourse before, so why don't we give that one to them? He was a traveling preacher who performed miracles. Only problem with that is he didn't travel or teach. His miracles, of course, were in association with all pagan gods. He had 12 disciples. That is false. He had one companion named Aruna in the Persian version, and in the Roman version he had two named Cautis and Caupatris. He was sacrificed for world peace, much like Jesus. Unfortunately, the myth of Mithra only involves him killing a sacred bull that was dangerous and survived. There's not much there about him being sacrificed and producing world peace. He just killed a dangerous animal. It was sacred. He promised his followers immortality, and he was called the way, the truth, and the life. There is no source that says anything close to that, and Mithra's sacred day was Sunday. Once again, what's your point? Because if you ask why the followers of Mithra worshipped on Sunday, you'll get a very different answer from the reason Christians did. Christians celebrated on Sunday to remember his resurrection. Jesus in no way commanded that they were to gather on that specific day. The Jewish Sabbath, which was a sacred day, was celebrated from sundown Friday to sundown Saturday, and this was maintained by the originators of Christianity who were Jewish. It is not a command for Christians to celebrate one day above another. In fact, the book of Romans teaches directly against that. So that is not going to hold a lot of water. Fifth, the claim that Jesus was based on the myth of Buddha is factually false. Note that the earliest biography on Buddha dates around 200 years after Jesus and when Thomas had already shared the gospel in India, as mentioned prior. The claim that he was born of the Virgin Maya on December 25th, once again, Buddha, the most prominent member, Buddha Siddhartha, was born on the 8th day of the 4th lunar moon, and Maya isn't comparable to Miriam. His mother was a queen, and Buddha was born naturally. His birth was announced by a star. That is factually false. He was born into royalty, and the king and his advisors celebrated the fact that it was a boy, not he was the fulfillment of any sort of prophecy. They were just glad that the king had an heir. He was pronounced ruler of the world, once again in the sources and biography on Buddha's life, which date 200 years after Jesus and around 700 to 800 years after the supposed events. The prophecy was made that he'd either be a great king or a teacher with a large religious following. And note, once again, this is 1,000 years after the fact. He fed 5,000 men from a small basket of cakes. That is false. The generic claim that he performed miracles doesn't equate him to being the inspiration for anyone or anything miraculous after him. He abolished idolatry. That's not true. He taught against it, but didn't abolish it. Likewise, Jesus taught against it, but didn't abolish it. He died on a cross. Again, crucifixion wasn't invented yet or practiced in India. He glowed in front of his followers on a mountain. The term glowing wasn't literal. It was referring to enlightenment. Jesus, according to the account of the Transfiguration, became like the sun shining in its strength, according to multiple eyewitnesses. Buddha just simply had a moment where he understood the solution to removing dukkha, or suffering. There are two kinds of light being described there. His tomb was supernaturally opened, and he ascended to nirvana. That is false. One source says he opened his coffin to speak before he died and then closed it himself, but that's not a resurrection as he hadn't died yet. And also note that the tomb in which he was buried and that he closed, according to that one source, stayed closed. He was tempted by the demon Mara. Well, that's not really specific, because noting that as well, the temptations weren't parallels of the temptations Israel fell to when they wandered in the wilderness, as in the account of Jesus. Buddha was just starving himself. According to some accounts, lived on a small handful of rice a day in this pursuit of asceticism. So having a starvation nightmare and facing deliberate references to the Old Testament in order to demonstrate that he was the perfect Israelite are two very different things. Buddha and Jesus were both of royal lineage. Again, what's your point? Because that doesn't prove a lot. If Jesus was a descendant of Judah and Buddha was a part of a royal family currently ruling in India at the time that had traded hands many times leading up to this, then you can't really say for certain this is a direct copy, just merely a coincidence even at best. And the claim that Buddha will return in the end times to judge the dead is false. A Buddha will return, but he will be referred to as Maitreya, and that will be an entirely different person than Siddhartha. Now, The claim that Jesus was based on the myth of Romulus. There are plenty of claims we can go into involving that. Osiris, Dionysus. We can talk about Serapis and Attis. We can talk about Ishtar and others, but I think that once again, Michael Jones' research and answering all of these will suffice for now. I've kept you here for about 20 minutes, so I think that this will suffice for the most common objections you'll hear. And if you want these put in writing in the comments so that you can store them for a later date, or want the link to the videos that all of this information was confirmed and, of course, originally received from, leave them in the comments below. I want to thank you for your time in listening to this study. If you have sincere questions, once again, they're always welcome, but make sure that you're using this information not only to shore up your faith, but to remove obstacles that are being put in people's way that simply aren't grounded in reality. I look forward to talking to you next time, and God bless you.